Well, all right, everybody. Welcome to Tailgating with Geniuses, lawn chair conversations with really smart people from the worlds of business, media, sports, and entertainment. I'm one of your two tolerable, yet extraordinarily lovable hosts. I'm Ken Schmidt, speaker, author, former head of communication at Harley-Davidson Motor Company, and co-founder of Torque Sessions, leadership events to help businesses become more competitive. And I'm joined, as always, by...
It's me, Martin Flaherty, and I'm also the co-founder of Torque Sessions with Ken. I'm the president at Pencil Box in Atlanta. But Ken, I'm just stopping because when did we become lovable?
We're lovable.
Really?
When I get emails to people, I love your show, that means that we're lovable.
Oh, see, I always thought it was the show. It wasn't actually us. It was the guests and what they were saying. I'm now, this helps a lot.
I humanize everything. Mark, when's the last time you thought about Woodsy the owl?
It's hilarious, man, because this is the first time I've thought about Woodsy owl since I was a kid.
Woodsy owl, give a hoot, don't pollute. And it's funny you said as a kid, because we remember, because there was extraordinary marketing behind it, the growth of fighting pollution. Words like ecology and helping the environment became part of the vernacular. These are things that virtually every American believed in, and there was tremendous marketing muscle behind it. Opportunities for people to band together and businesses to benefit and, in fact, make money by improving the environment, creating jobs to do that. And Martin and I were just talking about, my God, what a year this has been. Fire everywhere. The parts of the country that aren't on fire are underwater. It's just been nuts. And instead of people banding together and saying, yeah, let's solve these problems, there's all kinds of turmoil.
Well, I mean, I think one of the biggest issues is Woodsy isn't around anymore. I mean, if Woodsy was here, we would. It's like a Marvel hero, you know. If Woodsy was here, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying that there are ways that the American people, when we're given accurate information, things that are directly in front of us that we're seeing with our eyes, we saw the pollution back then. We saw the dead fish. We saw the forest burning. It's like nobody was going to disagree with that. We see it. This has to stop.
Yeah, rivers were literally on fire. Something that was thought to be an impossibility, but it's true. And I think while this subject can really be a downer for a lot of people, I think one of the beauties of our guest and who we've got coming on board with us to talk about is that actually this is an economic win story. This is a job creation story. This is not bringing back jobs from overseas. This is creating jobs here now in industries that'll do a couple things: get more people hired, grow entire regions of the country that have been left sort of fallow and unwatched or uncared for by anybody but the folks who were there. And then on top of that, help mitigate the crisis.
And while everyone is arguing about it, and while the media are spitting back and forth at each other, and politicians are spitting back and forth about these subjects with each other, smart businesses are reaping hundreds of billions of dollars in new revenue, creating hundreds of thousands of new jobs that aren't being talked about. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to talk to an expert on this. Like who's the smartest person we know on generating revenue, creating jobs through a clean economy? And we found our guest for today, Bob Keefe. And I might as well roll right into telling you who Bob is, because we like him so much. He's the executive director of E2. That's a national nonpartisan, and that's an important group of business leaders, investors, and professionals from every sector of the economy who advocate for smart policies that are good for the economy and good for the environment. He's the author of 2 books on the economics of climate change. The most recent, which is one of our favorite books this year, Clean Economy Now, Stories from the Front Line of an American Business Revolution. Before all this, Bob spent 25 years as a journalist in business, tech, and politics, and wrote for many of the biggest, largest newspapers in the country. It's an extraordinary book. Bob's an extraordinary guy. We really enjoyed talking to him, and I hope you enjoy our chat. Bob Keefe, thanks for joining us at Tailgating with Geniuses. How are you, man?
Oh, are you kidding? Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being with you. Tailgating with Geniuses. I feel like we ought to be drinking beer and playing cornhole or something right now, but
my God,
this is good.
I like you even more now, Bob. All right, but we want to talk about the book a little bit, the premise, what some of your discoveries are. But I think for the benefit of our listeners today,
Yeah.
we're talking about, of course, clean economy. Now, what exactly? I mean, people hear green economy, people hear troubled economy, but you don't hear clean economy a lot in vernacular. So, what exactly are we talking about here in the book?
Well, I've long avoided the term green jobs or green economy because nobody knows what the hell it means. It's one of those things that kind of sounds good or something, but what is it? What I refer to as clean energy, I refer to as clean transportation, and I refer to energy efficiency and things like that, which comprehensively, in my opinion, creates the clean economy.
Within the context of economy. And
Yeah,
I've always believed, if you want to find out what's going on somewhere, follow the money.
yeah,
And what we hear anytime the environment comes up, global warming is brought up as an issue. The incredible changes that we're seeing in the weather
right,
every day, as there's always going to be disagreement on that, or people who disagree on purpose
right.
with that. But we read your book, you start to uncover just how much money is being made as a result of addressing the environment, these issues, how many jobs are being created as a result of this kind of. So we're at this historic inflection point where, look, there's incredible opportunity here.
Yeah,
Leave the squabbling and the disbelief behind it. Follow the money. Look
yeah,
what's happening.
yeah. What I like to say, Ken, is look, I like polar bears as much as the next guy. I care about butterflies. I know about parts per million, but I also know about jobs. I know about economic growth. I know about American competitiveness. And I know that because we're finally doing something about climate change in this country, all of that is growing. We're creating jobs. We're creating record investments. We're bringing opportunities to parts of this country that frankly have been left behind by previous economic and technological revolutions. And the bonus is while we're doing it, we're creating the tools that are going to help us reduce pollution. That's going to help us breathe and drink clean water a little bit easier, and reduce carbon emissions that are driving so many of the expensive climate calamities that we're starting to see on a regular basis, not
So
only
so
in this
so
country but
so
around the
where's the celebration? This is what I don't
world.
get
Right
about all
here,
of this.
right
It is
here.
like,
We should be
wow.
celebrating. Listen, whenever I go talk to people, I say, "Hey, do you care about the economy? Do you care about the environment? Well, then raise your hands, keep them up, and wave them around like you're on the dance floor, because finally we're starting to do some good things.
That's great.
And as long as we don't go backward, and there is a good chance that we can go backward, we are finally on a track to make some real progress on this. And look, it's about America, but we're also talking about what is estimated at a $23 trillion global marketplace for clean energy projects. Of course, products like, of course, solar panels, but electric vehicles and batteries and everything else that we invented in this country, and then let every other country in the world take it over.
What we
Yeah.
do.
That's what we do.
So I don't I like this forward-looking approach that we've got here, and I don't want to litigate the past, but your book starts out really strong. I mean really strong, and it finishes great. I love the anecdotes you share about your time writing for the AJC, and spending time in Greenville and places
Yeah.
like that. But you start out first with an introduction by Arnold Schwarzenegger. So
Right.
congratulations.
Oh
You
no,
got you got some
that
star
was awesome.
power in your foreword, right?
Right.
But then in the whole litigating the past thing, this is near past. You start writing about the story about
Mm.
how the CHIPS Act and the Infrastructure Act, the IRA, moves forward. And what really made me happy, aside from the environmental benefit of all of this, is the fact that you write about bipartisanship. You write
Yeah.
about core things that we think are gone, as dead creatures, as extinct beings. This ability to do bipartisanship. Would you explain a little bit about what those two pieces of legislation are, what their impact is, and who brought them forward?
Well, there's actually three pieces of legislation that are really transforming our economy right now, Marty. And it's yes, it's the CHIPS Act, which invests in semiconductors and making semiconductors here in America instead of other parts of the world. There's the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, which invests, not just in roads and bridges, but also in electricity transmission grid. It invests in electric vehicle charging stations so we can have a network of charging so we don't get stuck on the highway and the EVs of the future. But then there's the Inflation Reduction Act, which is kind of the big enchilada. And the IRA, or the Inflation Reduction Act, is actually turning 2 years old this week. And that is $390 billion worth of investment into everything from tax credits for buying solar panels and electric vehicles to actually investing in communities around the country to help them do things like get electric school buses so their kids don't have to breathe diesel in the back of the bus on the way to school. Investing in startup money for entrepreneurs to start building this stuff in America instead of in China or some other country. So it's really those three pieces of legislation. It's just been incredible what's happened since then.
When you look at the direct benefit of the Inflation Reduction Act, so you've got jobs being created where there weren't jobs, or replacement jobs, or people moving out of the textile industry are now making batteries.
Yeah.
For the biggest car companies in the world. This is all really cool stuff.
Yeah.
And if you look at it at face value, you would say everybody would see the benefit of that. Everybody see worthwhile investments for business. Look, businesses are making a ton of money doing this, so everybody wins. Who, if there is a who, would be behind efforts to squelch this? And I don't even mean politically. Is it big oil? Is it somebody bigger than big oil that say, hey, you know what? That's hooey. We got to just stay the course where we've always been, using
Right.
fuel oil to propel the business forward, even though the benefits of going clean are so incredibly obvious. Is there a strong motion anti behind this?
Well, certainly the incumbent industries that, frankly, we owe a lot of gratitude to for powering this economy in America for centuries now, has not exactly embraced change like they should have. And I think they're going to end up looking like the IBM Selectric or the buggy whip industry at some point, or maybe even the industry I came from, which is the newspaper industry.
Sorry. Yeah.
I'm down the road. If they don't start to realize more that they need to invest not just in marketing, saying, "Oh yeah, we love the planet and we're doing good things," but actually investing in what again is the biggest economic transformation we've seen in our lifetimes and generations in this country, I'm pretty sure. So absolutely, definitely the incumbent industries, whether it's the fossil fuel industry or for a long time, the utility industry was dragging its feet because, look, businesses will do what they know how to do. And if all you know how to do is to build coal plants or gas plants, if all you know how to do is drill for oil or dig up coal, you're going to want to stick to that. And that's understandable. But you're giving a hell of an opportunity.
Do you see any evidence of the traditional companies pivoting toward clean? I mean, coal and oil are just examples.
They're starting to. I mean, the utility industry for sure. And it's not because they just want to do the right thing. It's because they want the cheapest supply that they can possibly get. And right now, unequivocally, the cheapest power that you can get is from solar and from wind and energy efficiency. So if you don't have to produce it, that's the cheapest way to, stay in business. But, there's not a single utility company right now that's building a coal-fired power plant. They're very, very, very rarely building gas plants. They're not building nuclear plants because it's too expensive. And we learned the lessons of what happened at Plant Vogtle in Georgia, which faced tens of billions in overruns and took decades to build. When you can build a solar farm or a wind farm in a fraction of that time for a fraction of that cost and have the same type of kilowatt output.
Well,
So
Bob, you are
utilities are starting to figure this out.
and for those who do not live in the state of Georgia and deal with Plant Vogel, and I am a person who does live in the state of Georgia and
Right.
deal with it. We've gotten some charming announcements from Georgia Power telling us that our rates are going up again.
That's
And so we've doubled the cost of a kilowatt hour, and yet we've brought another plant online difficultly, taking almost 3 decades to do it with
right.
astronomical. I mean, we're like a Superfund flight site when you think about like how incredibly difficult and badly managed this was. But that's the killer on this thing, because if you're the consumer sitting there, when do you start to see the benefit of this? When do you start seeing the payback? If we do this type of investment, how quickly, and in a realistic kitchen table economics
Mm,
approach, when do we start seeing this payback?
yeah. Great question. And I think the answer is it depends on where you live. In Georgia, you're going to be paying as a ratepayer for Vocal for a very long time. Let's face it, that's
Yeah.
the facts. It was an expensive project, and somebody's got to pay for it, and of course, it's going to be ratepayers. If you're in California, you have some of the highest electricity rates in the country, not because we're building nuclear plants, but because the power companies have to replace all of the lines so they quit catching the state on fire, because the transmission in this state is so out of date. We've got a ton of solar, got a ton of wind. There are days when we produce well over 100% energy from renewables, and now that batteries are coming online, can continue that through the night. But when the utilities have to file for bankruptcy and pay billions of dollars out in wildfire claims because some 99-cent connector failed on a power line like it did in the Paradise Fire in California, and set a good portion of the state on fire. Well, guess what? Those costs get passed along to ratepayers as well, and they got to bury those lines now because they've realized that, look, in with climate as it is now, those record droughts, those record high winds, those crazy high winds that used to come up every now and then is a regular thing now. So we got to address that.
So
But I'm sorry, not to interrupt, but if you look at a place like Iowa, or which is the number 2 wind state in the country, if you look at parts of Texas, which is the number 1 wind, and now I think the number 1 solar state in the country, those prices are going to be lower because you're getting cheaper power, and they don't have to deal with nuclear plants or replacing a bunch of power lines like they do in those two other states I mentioned.
Bob, I think you talked about the power lines, and it's fascinating to me because I dork out about a bunch of this stuff.
You
I'm
dork
not
out loud
capable.
about a lot of things.
ADHD has just look it up in a dictionary, and the picture is me. So any little bit of whatever I get fascinated by. But the thing when you talk about the overhead power lines is
Yeah,
both Ken and I work a lot overseas, and Europeans particularly coming over here, they sort of like, what's going on? Why do you
right.
guys still have power lines above? And I started looking into it, and it's nothing but a cost factor. No
That's
one
right.
has ever said this is a smarter way to distribute power. It's actually more problematic. The
Right.
reason it is there is because on a per dollar basis, it's cheaper to stick a loblolly pine tree that's been soaked in creosote and then wrap a bunch of transformers on it and pull some wire. That is a cheaper thing than digging up a lawn and
You're
doing
right.
the installation there. So are we at it's time to eat our vegetables moment with some real benefits, or like, because this stuff has been out there for a while, what has been the holdback for us to implement these things?
Well, there are parts of this electric grid in America that are over a century old. And again, if you look at what happened in one of the biggest fires in our country's history, in the Paradise Fire in California a few years back, it was literally a 99-cent connector that failed. That was put up there in the 1920s, I believe, and never replaced. Yeah. The
Wow.
bills come due. It's like if you're driving your car and you never change the oil. If you're
Yeah.
driving an EV, you don't have to, but if you're driving a gas powered car, you never change the oil, you're going to have to pay for that.
Martin just
Take this.
said, "Oh shit, I'm supposed to change the oil in my car."
Oh, hang on, hang on. I will tell you that in like 1994, I owned a Chevy Corsair.
Oh, man.
No,
That was you?
that. Well, not only that, it was the Euro edition,
Well,
No,
and it was
stylish.
pretty great. It was pretty great. But one of the things, and I kid you not, I did not know this, but the light panel in on the dashboard failed. It did not light up, right? So the speedometer and the odometer, because you really needed that odometer on a four banger. The thing though is I'm driving in Rome, Georgia, and all of a sudden I'm on this bridge and I stop driving. The car just stops. The engine seized the oil. There was
See?
there was
oh,
no
man.
pressure read. So I'm in that guy, Ken. I've actually seized and killed the car based
Oh,
on based on not keeping up with this. But Bob, unless you want to hear more car stories from me, which no one does, tell me
clicky
like
clack.
great. Well then I'll get the one who stays alive for a while longer. See you, Ken. Bob, from talk about the job creation on this, because I don't want this to be presented in some sort of ephemeral way that there are a bunch of Silicon Valley types, nothing wrong with those guys, but high engineers who spend a lot of time and money at schools studying computer science, and this is some whizzy tech. I think what you wrote really accurately is these are solid, what we would consider just regular, normal industrial and office level job creation that is taking place because of this act. Would you go into that for me?
That's right. It's construction, by the way. It's not just office jobs when people think about clean energy and clean energy jobs, I think they quite naturally go to solar panel installers or wind turbine technicians, which is great. But the biggest part of the clean energy economy is actually energy efficiency. So think about the construction workers that come into your house and put insulation up in your attic or put new windows and doors on there that low E rating windows and doors on.
Yeah.
Think about the HVAC technicians that are now putting in heat pumps around the country and ripping out old gas furnaces. Think about the electricians that are going into high rises in downtown Atlanta or Washington, D.C., and swapping out old lighting for high efficiency LED lighting. Think about the factory workers that are building Energy Star appliances that are saving money, et cetera. But the bottom line is, look, what we know at my organization, we've been tracking clean energy jobs for over a decade now. What we know is that there are now more than 3.3 million Americans that work in clean energy in one form or fashion. But it's electricians, it's construction workers, it's factory workers, and yes, it's solar installers and wind turbine technicians, and increasingly, it's people that are building electric vehicles or batteries or the things about them. And these are blue collar jobs for the most part. This isn't Silicon Valley, venture fund managers. These are people in places like Dalton, Georgia, that are making solar panels at Q Cells, or Hyundai down in Savannah building the newest line of electric vehicles, or Alabama or Arizona building solar panels for First Solar, a big Ohio company. Or sorry, it's not Ohio, guys. I think it's based in Arizona, but they're also building a plant in Ohio. That previously we had to buy this stuff from China. China supplies 95% of the solar panels in the world. It supplies about 95% of the batteries in the world. But thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, and not just the direct investments and the tax credits for doing this stuff, but really for the market signal it's sent to businesses, we're finally starting to build this stuff in the United States.
If you're running a business, though, Bob, and you're perhaps an investment fund, and you're thinking, all right, I want to be proactive. I want to be a part of this. I want to create jobs. I want to create revenue, reward shareholders, all that wonderful stuff. And in the back of your mind, you're thinking, well, there's without getting political, threats made by one side of the aisle saying, hey, if we take power or take over in January, we're going to start rolling all of this stuff back. We're going to go back to the environmental policies of that predated what just happened 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Do you hear that from business? I want to wait. I don't want to jump in. I want to jump in, but I don't want to jump in with both feet until I know that the coast is clear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm hearing that. And look, it's casting a real pall over
That's
all of
nuts.
this progress, frankly. But let me back up if I could and give a better handle on what has happened since the IRA and why I call this a clean economy revolution. So after the Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law on August 16th, 2022, my organization E2 has been tracking the number of major clean energy projects related to the IRA that have been announced. And what we know is that there are now more than 330 major clean energy projects. We're talking about EV factories, battery factories, solar panel, hydrogen now, electrolyzers being built, heat pump factories being built, 330 major factories and other projects popping up in about 41 states. $120 billion worth of private sector investment. That's not government loans or grants. Those are companies investing in these factories and building these factories. 108,000 jobs already announced. When in the world have we seen that kind of economic growth in America? I think it's been
That's
a mighty
incredible,
long
yeah.
time. But at the same time, by the way, let me give you this other stat. Of those 330 plus projects, about 60% of them are in Republican congressional districts. When you look at the total amount of money invested, that 120 billion, about 70% of that and about 70% of the jobs are in Republican congressional districts. Michigan's at the top of the list, but then there's Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Texas, Ohio. Not exactly, left-wing California hippies and New York tree huggers, right? We're talking about the heart of America right here. Now, even though all of those, the majority of those projects are going into Republican congressional districts, there's been more than 40 attempts in Congress since it was passed to roll back the IRA.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all in the U.S. House. That's unfortunate because it's not going to be, again, tree huggers in New York or California that are going to get hurt. It's working folks in South Carolina and North Carolina and Georgia, Ohio, et cetera. And that's just unfortunate. But to get to your point about is it already casting a pall over things, I was actually with the U.S. CEO of a battery company that's building a factory in Georgia, wants to hire, I think, 1,000 or so workers, something like a $2 billion factory. And we happened to be meeting with some Republican lawmaker in Washington, D.C. And this unnamed lawmaker basically said, yeah, you don't have to worry about that, all this talk about rolling back the IRA, and don't worry about that stuff on the campaign trail. That's just political talk. We know this is creating jobs. We know, we're for bringing investments into our state. And the CEO I was with says, well, that's great. But just so you know, every time you guys file some bill to roll back the IRA, every time somebody's on the campaign trail saying we're going to kill this crazy Green New Deal crap, that makes it harder for me to get financing for this project I want to build in your district because banks don't want to lend money on uncertainty. It makes it harder for me to hire workers because workers are unsure what's going to happen. And is that what you really want, Mr. Congressman?
And then they're forced to talk out both sides of their mouth, which is the sort of the trap that we find ourselves in. Can I draw a strange parallel here, Bob?
Yeah.
That as a youngin, I was around for I guess you call it like the birth of the ecology movement, and when ecology and environmentalism sort of entered the public vernacular back in the 70s. And you could see through great communication and great marketing, there wasn't a soul in the country that didn't see rivers on fire, smokestacks belching out black smoke, soot, dead fish, forests burning.
Right.
And at no point in that, as people embraced it and things, began to clean up right before our eyes, and people were actually involved in the process, and kids were learning about it in school, you never heard anybody pushing back, say, This is all, this is a bunch of crap.
Yeah,
This is because you can see it. It's the same today. I mean, everybody sees what's happening. You look at what's happening with the weather and the wildfires and the flooding and the severity of the rains that are coming down, and the real and present danger and opportunity are hitting people square in the face every day.
that's right.
And yet lots of people are choosing or being told to not believe in this. Do you see that ebbing as a result of more and more awareness of the revenue and jobs being created here? Are we still too far behind the curve for the hearts and minds to start to open to this?
I truly believe that if we are going to bridge this false partisan divide over climate change, over clean energy, over electric vehicles or solar or whatever, it's going to be because it makes economic sense. And it's just unequivocally making economic sense now. And look, remember where I said all those factories are going, or the majority of those factories are going. It gets a little harder to say, oh, solar panels don't work when you're actually making it. It gets harder to say, oh, electric vehicles suck when you're making them. And it gets harder to say you're against those things when your constituents are the ones that are feeding their family from them, from jobs and that stuff, right? So, yes, I truly believe that if we're going to bridge this ridiculous, there should be nothing partisan and political about any of this. But because of that falsity has been made, I truly believe the only way that we're going to get over that is when, like anything, it becomes a pocketbook issue. Again, both the benefits and the costs.
Yeah, and I made so much is too much, but headway in the early works and the environmental stuff that I did, mostly in the world, we'll call it sustainability, with manufacturers
Yeah.
and the green building movement with commercial buildings. And every time I sat in front of a CFO, I did not talk about polar bears as much as I like them. And anybody who ever put the visual of those two hands together with a little cup with a little bit of earth and a sprout popping out of it, that I want to shoot that stock photographer, because that caused more damage environmentally than anything else. But I would sit with these guys, and we never talked about the environment. We never talked about carbon. We never talked about anything. We talked about bottom line issues. We talked about the costs involved from an energy standpoint, water use standpoint, material optimization. So a lot of it is baked in. What I loved that I saw when companies were adhering to lean manufacturing or business practices that were all about efficiencies, it was a relatively easy conversation to have about bottom line, because just you're talking about cost savings and greater efficiencies, which was what I loved about what you wrote about in this book. It is so driven by bottom line business issues.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And look, in my day job, I run an organization called E2. We got our start 25 years ago, working on what then were the first ever clean vehicle standards in the country, back when business people didn't get involved in environmental issues, right? But we did it because we figured that, you know what, if we pass the right policies, maybe you could drive a little innovation. And again, this was 25 years ago. Maybe those Prius thingies will become more commonplace. And who knows, maybe even we'll figure out electric vehicles someday. But if we don't change what we're doing, we're going to get left behind by the rest of the world. So, my organization started with a handful of business people in California, but now we have more than 10,000 members and supporters who work or do business in just about every state in the country and across every sector of the economies. It's not VC folks, and it's not solar panel folks. Yes, we have some of those, but we have restaurant owners and hotel owners and real estate people and construction people who realize that, yes, there is economic opportunity in doing something good for our environment, but there's also economic costs if we don't address these things that are hammering our economy right now and are going to filter down to my business.
Hey, Bob, you've been super generous with your time, and we greatly appreciate it. But let me ask you a closer question here
Yeah.
for the benefit of our listeners. What can we all collectively do other than reading your wonderful book, Clean Economy Now: Stories from the Front Lines of an American Revolution, with forward by Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Well,
What can we be doing inside of our businesses to get smarter on this, to see where the opportunities are, to get people pointed in the right direction, so that we stop making this a debatable,
yeah.
Political hinged, ugly conversation, and start making it more proactive about creating jobs and creating revenue?
Right. Well, I think two things, and the most important and both easiest and hardest, for depending on who you're talking to, is to let your lawmaker know. Let your member of Congress know that you support this stuff, because those are the folks that may be trying to roll it back, or may be helping shore it up. The other thing is to do what you're doing right now, gentlemen, which is, frankly, spread the word. Make sure people understand that this isn't, just liberal tree huggers trying to save polar bears. This is our economy at stake. And if we don't get moving, yes, it's going to hurt our environment, but we're also going to get left in the dust by China and every other country who is outpacing us dramatically. We're finally getting back in the game. We can't afford to go backward again.
Amen, brother.
And I would say that we can do this because we're all old enough to remember that coffee in America, if you're older than 40, coffee in America tasted like garbage. And we were terrible at coffee. And then all of a sudden, Howard Schultz comes along and says, wait a minute, there's this thing called cafes. We can do this.
Yeah.
Beer in America tasted like hell until Anchor, those guys at Anchor Steam in San Francisco said, hang on, wait a minute, we can get hops and we can create something interesting.
Quick note to my friends in Milwaukee: he didn't mean that. He did not mean that.
And I've loved touring the Pabst plant and various little breweries in Milwaukee. Great town. But
don't forget Sam Adams, by the way.
Yeah,
don't forget Sam Adams in Boston.
Absolutely, in Boston,
We love
right? Actually, there was a Belgian CEO that I'm working with who told me, grabbed me, he's like, do you know this beer called Sam Adams? He's like, when I went to grad school in Boston, and I had to listen to this guy tell me about this little craft brewer in Boston called Sam Adams. I made him happy and broke his heart when he found out that they were a national product right now. But look, we can do this. It's just people like you creating books like this that are fascinating to read, start to finish. And by the way, one of the first things I did, man, is I went to the back and I looked at your sources. I was like, okay, so where is this data coming from? Holy crap, congratulations. And that's a hell of a lot of work. I looked in here and was entertained, fascinated, and the validation of all of these points is right here. So you've created something as close as I can get to, is sort of this highly usable book for business people that tells a hell of a fun story about how this gets forward, what its impacts are. We learn about some dark energy. Thank you for the people of Ohio for turning gasoline into green energy. What the hell is going on?
Right.
Still some crazies out there, but great book, and this country can do it.
Well, again, flattered and honored, and thank you both for what you do and for letting me join you for a little bit.
Appreciate you, Bob. Thanks for joining us.
Well, Ken, I'm always taken when you speak to an expert who's done their research and he's kind of preaching to the choir with me, someone who's been involved in the issue of sustainability for 25 plus years. But it really is what's great for me to hear from guys like Bob and from people in this world, especially in the book, Green Economy Now, is just a recording of all of the actual impacts, but not like, hey, the earth is getting better, the earth is getting worse, but job creation. Like, what is actually happening in an economy where green technology and the use of alternative energies and such is the first mover position, as opposed to a secondary thing that we all should think about.
Absolutely. And what gets me, the really strange paradox, Martin, is I think the average person on the street will tell you that big business holds the strings behind government. no matter what your political leanings are. It's what big business wants government to do tends to be what big government reacts to, because it's good for everybody when it's good for big business. Big businesses essentially put these folks in office. So if government's moving on something, it's because big business is behind it. So you can deny climate change all you want. You can be one of those people who spoke out against things like Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act that benefits everybody, but somebody told you to not like it. So you can be against it all you want, but just think for 1 second. If the big businesses that ultimately impact and benefit all of us, because that's job creation at all levels, when big business does well, when big business is behind something, pushing it into the halls of government, and government is supporting it, that should be telling you something. And it should also be telling you when you go into the voting booth that if the people that you support are blocking this or standing in the way of this or speaking ill of it, then maybe you should start thinking a little bit more about who represents you. And that's all I'm going to say about it. Don't get in the way of job creation.
Well, that's the killer. It's job creation. I mean, as Bob goes into it in detail, you see all of this just completely referenceable, completely verifiable data about jobs that were created. I know. I live in a state right now. The state of Georgia is benefiting in astronomical ways with regards to the creation of battery production facilities. Georgia is, I think Georgia in, what did Bob say? One of the Carolinas is the fastest growing area for creation of this type of tech. And I'll end my just rants on all of this, but years ago I used to hear from people that said, the cost and the investment of doing this type of work, solar panels, wind farms, all of this, it just was too much money for the ROI on the creation of the energy. Well, what's been blowing my mind, and Google it, anyone go out there and take a look at it, in the past 20 years, there has been upwards of 90%, roughly a 70 to 90% reduction in the cost of energy production from solar panels. So the production of solar panels has come down, and the yield that they're throwing off is huge. And then also that the same thing is happening over in wind. So these things do take time, a couple decades. But what you see as a result of it is now we can look at what that expenditure was back then, and there were mistakes that were made, Solera and other places like that, which were just boondoggles. But in general, across the way, you're seeing tremendous reductions and real impacts. And Bob highlights.
That's what I love about Bob. It just follow the money, folks.
Yeah,
he couldn't have said it more clearly.
All right, sir. Well, thanks so much for joining. It was great talking to you again, Ken. I will see you on Friday for the Microdose Show. Thanks again to Bob Keefe. Go get the book, Green Economy Now. If nothing else, just read the intro. Read the first chapter. It will blow your mind. It's a real joy. There you go. Ken's showing it right there. Green Economy Now. It kind of reads like a potboiler. The first chapter alone is kind of like, oh my God, and it's all about legislation, which is bizarre. But Ken, I will see you on Friday. Thanks a lot, and more to follow.
See you, everybody.